Hello class, welcome to our second lesson dealing with multiplying integers. Hopefully by now you have a basic concept of how to multiply integers. Really we're going to have a focus on some exponent questions today and just plugging things in and making sure we understand what they're looking at. First thing I'd like you to do is take a moment and try these 6 questions. Make sure you pause the video before you go to the next part of this and ensure that you are okay on solving all 6 of these. So my recommendation is treat this kind of like a homework assignment. Real quick and just try these 6 questions. You'll notice that some of these have the dot in them and some of them have parentheses. Remember, I tend to use just parentheses here. I think it takes a little bit less time, but the dot is also acceptable. When you're writing things, either way would be okay. So something to keep in mind as you're looking at those scenarios. Okay, so the answers to these questions. All 6 of them are here. The important thing is which ones were positive and which ones were negative. Remember, if there's one negative number, it makes the whole thing negative. If there's 2 negative numbers or 0, okay, that makes the whole number positive because they pair up and cancel each other out. So something to keep in mind as you're looking at these scenarios, like for example, number 6, the -5 and -12 become a positive 60. Okay, we're going to focus on some exponent ideas. The more that you can understand about this topic today, the better it's going to be for you as you move through the semester and in your future classes. For example, the first one, notice the parentheses around the -7. So that means whatever I'm squaring, it's that thing times itself. So whatever's inside that parenthesis needs to be written, and squaring means multiply a number times itself, and negative times a negative is positive, and that's 49. Notice the difference of the second one. See how the negative sign's not in the parentheses like it is in the first one? That means, in the order of operations, really it meant -1 times 4 squared. We don't write -1 times everything. Okay, that's kind of like an identity property. Okay, so if you see a negative without parentheses like that, what you could do is make it -1 times that. And so this one actually is negative because it's not in parentheses. That's also why sometimes your calculators put an answer in one way or the other, because the parentheses matter a lot about these scenarios. You'll notice in this last one, it's -5 to the third. That's -5 times itself times itself. Notice there's 3 negatives here, so it actually will be a negative answer because there's an odd amount of negatives. You could probably make a conjecture about what that will mean. Let's say this is to the 5th or 6th power, okay, for these exponents here, about what will happen to the positive or negative aspect of the number. This will be -125. Because 5 times 5 is 25, and then another times 5 would be 125, and it's negative because there's 3 of them. 2 of them would pair up, and there's 1 left over. Take a moment and try these 4 questions out. Remember to think about where's the negative sign, is it in the parentheses, is it not in the parentheses, and how to find those answers. So take a moment, pause the video, and try these questions out. Okay, here are all 4 answers. The key, first one, -3 times itself is 9. Second one, there's 3 negatives, so that's why the answer is negative. And on 11 and 12 here, they're both going to be negative answers because they're not in parentheses. It's irrelevant to what happens outside of it because it's going to be a negative. The only time there may be an issue is if there's like a double negative, like one inside the parentheses and one outside. Remember, exponents come before multiplication, so you'd have to do the exponent first. But those last 2 numbers should be negatives because of them the negative sign being kind of by itself. It's a times -1. The rest of today is substituting and evaluating expressions. My suggestion is when you substitute a number in for a variable, you put it in parentheses. That might help figure out what's going on. For example, x to the third would be -3 to the third, which is -3 times itself, which will be a negative because there's 3 of them, and it's 27. Notice here it has a negative with y squared, which means the negative's not in parentheses. So I could just put the 4 in parentheses. That might help remind you, oh, that's not the -4 that's in parentheses. It's just the 4. And it should be a negative answer of -16. But remember, if you just put the number in parentheses, that might solve a lot of your issues as you're going through these. The next 2 questions are just plugging in a lot of stuff. Honestly, the most common mistake is you just plug in the wrong number for the wrong variable. Okay, notice here it has x, y, z. That means multiplication. So that'd be 4 times -3 times 4 times -5. Associative property, I can multiply them in whatever order I choose. So I'm going to choose to multiply the 3 and the 5 together first, and then times 4. I get an answer of 60 here for my final answer. It's positive because there were 2 negative numbers to start with. In the second one, there's a lot of stuff going on here, so let's pay attention to what we're finding. Notice how nice and neat my work is. The first step should always be plug in and then start to evaluate. What you don't want to do is plug in, do all your math, and then say, oh, by the way, the answer is 41. I'm not going to believe what you're saying. Make sure that you show some work, show the setup. Your first step on all substitution questions should be plug in the numbers for the original variables, and then go from there. So negative 3 squared is 9. So notice my first step was that. From there, 9 times 4 is 36. But then, because you've already learned adding and subtracting, now we can do keep, change. So keep the number, change subtraction to a plus, change the negative to a negative 5 to a positive 5, and minus a negative becomes plus a positive. Don't forget, those ideas from adding and subtracting still apply. If you see subtraction, do keep, change, add the opposite. If you see addition, add the negatives, add the positives, then do one subtraction would probably be a good suggestion as you're looking at those scenarios. But look at how methodical I am here. Okay, make sure that you have a methodical way of solving. And it should kind of look like this, or maybe it's more horizontal. But you need to be able to show your steps so that when you have to explain your work on, say, a test, then you already have it set up. It's very important that you do that for these questions. Okay, homework today, numbers 1 through 7, that's all of them. 27 through 47 is the odds, and then number 48. Please make sure you show your work. I would say especially on 33 and 35, make sure that you explain where you're coming from on those questions. Those versions are, I wouldn't say more important, but have more steps involved, and you want to make sure that you're able to explain it to someone. Have a good day, everybody.